What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. On today's show, I am interviewing Keith Knight of the Don't Tread on Anyone show. You find his show on YouTube, BitChute, LBRY, all the new streaming sites and stuff like that. So make sure you check out his work and subscribe to it somewhere. You can also find it at the Libertarian Institute along with this show. And so we have a really great interview talking about Walter Williams and libertarian economics. So I'll get to that interview right after I talk about the sponsor of the show, Paloma Verde. Paloma Verde is where you get your CBD products. When you buy your products from Paloma Verde, you know they're lab tested, so you get good results and they're solid products. You're getting the same thing every time. That's why I enjoy taking their products. Also, when you buy those, you support the show, which is helpful, and you support Carlos and his wife Vanessa, who are building this business, Paloma Verde. It was struck by the COVID lockdowns, and so their physical location had trouble getting off the ground. But they're doing a lot of cool stuff on the online thing. So they got like a nice education sheet on their website to get informed on how CBD could help you. So go to palomaverdestore.com for your CBD products and use the promo code PEACE, PEACE, for 25% off, and to let them know that you heard about it through the show. What's up, Keith? How's it going? Welcome to Conflicts of Interest. Your first time on this show, but of course, we've talked in the past on my old show, Foreign Policy Focus. I'll link to that episode in the show notes page, but how's it going?
It's going pretty well. Still very upset with the whole Walter Williams passing, but seeing so many people keep his memory alive is really cool.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's kind of what I want to have you on the show to talk about today. In the past, I had the show Foreign Policy Focus, so never really taught economics. But one of the reasons I picked up in, Will as a co-host and then changed the show name was to talk more about economics and stuff like that. And it, seemed like the passing of Walter Williams, who was somebody that I watched everything. Like that was one of the guys like 10 years ago or so on YouTube. I'm pretty sure I watched every video that was on YouTube of Walter Williams. And so he taught me a lot about economics. I don't know if I read any of his books. Like I read pretty much all Thomas Sowell's books and Tom Woods and Bob Murphy, a couple Mises books on like economics and stuff. But he's now passed away, and so I thought it would be a great time to talk a little bit about like libertarian and Austrian economics, Walter Williams, and capitalism, freedom, and all that stuff. And couldn't think of a better person to do that with than Keith Knight here, who is just so well read on the libertarian economics. So ready to get into this?
I am, yes. Williams gives us so much material to work with. I was actually introduced to him because I was in around 2008 to 2009 and a half. I was still an Obama supporter, and I think my default, just because it's all I had known, was that the only reason you could hate Obama is one, you're a racist, and two, you hate the poor. So I think it was just me saying that, oh my God, a black guy is criticizing Obama. This he might actually have some ideas, and this is what eventually got me out of progressivism, was simply hearing someone talk about actual ideas. And once you hear principles and history and morality and philosophy being discussed, then this whole thing of like just one political opponent calling the other a socialist, the other calls the other one a racist, it's so trivial once you get into it. So I think the best thing on I'm sorry, did you have a starting point with Williams that you wanted to go to?
Not particularly. I guess I was wondering if like, because I do have some listeners to the show who are more interested in the foreign policy side of stuff. I think they will get a lot of this conversation, but just generally, like maybe a brief overview of Walter Williams for somebody who's maybe only heard the name once or twice and isn't, uh, you know, hasn't read his work or watched, a ton of YouTube.
Well, born in 1936, Williams grew up in sort of like a Jim Crow style America, where there was very different going from 1936 America to first Black President America, and he was actually commenting in a book called Economics and Race, or Race and Economics, and he basically brings out the idea that you can't judge something just by looking at the results. By the way, if anyone wants a great summary of his best work, it's a 10-page paper called The Argument for Free Markets, Morality versus Efficiency. So he really gets to the heart of everything there. So, one of the things he mentions in this um, article is he gives the analogy of a poker game. So, when looking at just and unjust outcomes in society, you might say, well, it's unfair that group A has X amount and group B has Y amount. Well, instead of looking at just the results, what we have to do is look at the process of how these things come about. So imagine, small scale, you're in a poker game and one person has a lot of money, someone else has 15%, and someone else has, 10% of the money. Is this fair? Well, all you're looking at are the results. You're not focusing on the process. The process is what matters. So he says there's a number of things. There's a number of process questions, and these would include something like, did the players play voluntarily? The fact that that's the first question on his mind is just so vital, because he realizes that it's the foundation of morality. Always getting back to that, which the status cannot justify whenever their programs are being advocated. They don't pass the first rule of letting people live their lives unaggressed. The second question, he says, were the poker rules neutral and unbiasedly applied? So when structuring any society or even sort of game, you would want to make sure you have rules that pass the Kantian categorical imperative of universalization. So if I can't do it to you, well, that implies you can't do it to me. This is what makes something like slavery logically inconsistent. Because if it is justified, then everyone owns everyone else's body. So again, just with this great poker analogy, he really gets at the heart of the political philosophy.
Well,
Then he said,
can I
yeah.
just say on something right there that when I started to really learn about libertarianism and this kind of economics, that I really thought was important was that this isn't just like a prescription of what should happen with healthcare, but rather what is, like, fundamental, like a priori, like, arguments about humanity, like you are free, like that's where you have to start, not should you have healthcare or not, should you have a universal basic income or not. And so it seemed to be, there's a lot more consistency in like philosophy and principle where it's all rooted in, rather than seeming just arbitrary. Whereas, is a poker game the right thing to have or not? Does it encourage bad behavior, sinful acts, and stuff like that? So that's just one of the things I really like about libertarian economics and Walter Williams and how he describes things.
Well, yeah, instead of getting you to think in Don Lemon talking points, you're actually addressing things at a foundational level. So it totally changes. I mean, you could read 1,000 articles on CNN, and none of them will be as intellectually stimulating as this article, especially for someone being introduced to the ideas. And then his final question for the poker game was, the game played without cheating? If the processes were just, affirmative answers would be given to those three questions, and there would be poker justice irrespective of outcome. So, in other words, it's not justified to look at conflicts of interest. And my show, Keith Knight Don't Tread on Anyone. See, you have more listeners than I do, therefore you're exploiting me, and I need to collectivize against you with a dictatorship of the proletariat to get just outcomes. Look, Yeah, what you're essentially saying, if you advocate statism or violent redistributionism of any form, you're essentially saying that consumers' voices do not matter. And in a situation where A and B want to make an exchange, a third party, C, Congress, or, you know, the workers or anyone else, has the right to initiate aggression against these two consenting parties. This is what Williams gets at the heart at. He says, he has this great one where he calls money certificates of performance. So you can sort of think of them as like these little rewards that you can allocate to people. And if you want more LeBron James, well, you pay LeBron James and then he has an incentive to produce more. That's how Walmart and Amazon go from these little shops no one's ever heard of to things that we can always get because they've gotten so many certificates of performance from their voters, so to speak, from their customers who have really appreciated the products and services that they've provided.
Well, I mean, can I take a quick detour on that because I know there's going to be some people who jump and they say, "Oh, well, Amazon and Walmart really aren't that great. There's just all these government subsidies and stuff like that." And so, we're in a particularly unique situation here in late 2020 where basically there, in a lot of ways, that's kind of how you could get your stuff, Walmart and Amazon. There's not many other options, just legally what's allowed to open or not. Small businesses are forced to close and big businesses are allowed to stay open. And it seems to happen, on the store level, on the, restaurant level, on even like the car dealership level, where if you got like a little lot and you're just some guy selling used cars, probably not going to stay open. You're a big nationwide car chain. I bet you got the lobbyists to get your businesses open. So, just point that out.
Of course. Well, that's a vitally important aspect that a lot of people don't appreciate. The biggest anti-free market advocates, as Milton Friedman would always say, are intellectuals and businessmen. Since the days of Frederick Engels, the capitalist, the business owner who was funding Karl Marx, to Jacob Schiff funding the Russian Revolution, one of the richest bankers ever, to George Soros funding MoveOn.org, they have always advocated big government. And I bet, and Bezos comes out and supports the minimum wage laws, as does Doug McMullen and H. Lee Scott, the two former CEOs of Walmart. So the incredible thing is that they are so often the ones advocating this. It's generally referred to as regulatory capture. This is when any industry is regulated. What Congress will essentially do is appoint a committee who will seek people who are extremely informed on on how the industry works so they could properly regulate it. The problem is the people with the most amount of information are the CEOs and heads of industry in those areas. The perfect example is in 1910, J.P. Morgan got Frank Vanderlip, Paul Warburg, um, and five other gentlemen to his house on Jekyll Island, and they wrote what today is the Federal Reserve Act. One probably the biggest regulation, the single act of regulation. It just monopolized the currency and into the hands of the state in the year 1913. This was actually verified by one of the guys at the meeting, Frank Vanderlip, in 1935. So yes, you're definitely correct. It's not always the result of free markets that companies get so big. It's often at the expense of them. So that is important.
Right. And I mean, I think where we are now, it's it seems like it's every industry, even talking about Bezos, he owns the Washington Post. I got on the news ticker today for the show. One, I saw a reason where there's a proposal to stick another $25 billion bailout in there for the airlines, or $25 billion, and they say it's going to save like 30,000 jobs, which about $700,000 a job. And, this is going to be a good idea. And this is what reasonable people are going to support because it saves jobs. And that's going to be the narrative. And man, I gotta say, if I were like a baggage guy working at an airline or something like that, I'll take the $700,000 directly and you don't have to give it to the airline at all. Right? I mean, come on.
Exactly. Great points. You very often have people who have a concentrated benefit and a dispersed cost. So the likelihood of anyone, like, if, let's say everyone found out about the banker bailouts of 2008. I think like Dianne Feinstein, according to Tom Woods' book Meltdown, got like 2,000 calls. 95% were don't bail out the banks. She, of course, voted to bail them out, because our representatives represent us, and the social contract's a totally real thing. So, in light of that, it doesn't really make economic sense for you as an individual to go protest something because the likelihood of you changing it's very small. And for you, it only is going to cost you 10, 20, $30, which you'll make in a couple hours at work. Whereas with them, they have every incentive to send 50 lobbyists saying, the world economy is going to collapse unless you give the bankers trillions. So, oh, that's pretty convenient. Um, yeah, of course, with concentrated benefits and dispersed costs, you get a constant growth of the state. It's in the small interest groups to heavily lobby so they can reap benefits. And for us, it's like, oh, was there another Patriot Act passed? It's so hard, and they never listen to me anyways. So that's probably, it's probably not even worth fighting. This is what Hans Hoppe says is the general justification or the general reason that governments constantly grow. Special interest groups have a big incentive. Average Joe does not have an incentive.
Right.
Um, but uh, we can get to that later. Is there anything you wanted to say on that?
Yeah, the last point I was just gonna make is that and you have all this stuff that's supposed to be like private industry, and we show like, or looking at how the government is like heavily influenced and help build these companies up. But then you have other things that are also called private companies like Lockheed Martin and these weapon makers like Raytheon, right? And we spend what, $1 trillion a year on our military, and Trump's secretary, defense secretaries, one was a former Raytheon lobbyist, one was a former Boeing lobbyist, are board members. And it looks like Biden's about to appoint this former retired general now, Lloyd Austin. And it turns out this guy is sitting on the board of Raytheon. And so, I mean, it's crazy that, even the heads of these entire departments that are in charge of so much spending now are formerly board members, and I'm sure have tons of stock in, legacy reasons to ensure that, the profits of those companies go on. And so, that means building more bombs and spending more money on the military.
Of course, yeah. One of the things that people often mistake is to just say private good, public bad. But public, if we're assuming funded by the state, meaning it's coercively funded, yes, it's bad in every case and immoral. However, just because something is private doesn't mean it's morally justified. So let's get back to Walter Williams, where he says he starts this excellent paper off. Freedom's first principle is each person owns himself. Notice he didn't say uh, freedom is electing Republicans or voting Libertarian or opposing the government. That's 50 steps in the complexity direction that human beings have, created with social constructs and whatnot. If you don't own yourself, someone else owns you, claiming a better claim to your body than you actually have. So they own their own body and they own your body. That is slavery. So that is the foundation of slavery. This is an idea that has existed for, I don't know, the beginning of time and today still exists under the guise of conscription and the draft and regulation. It's some people claiming to own the bodies of others. So when you get into this, well, Boeing's a private company, or Twitter's or Facebook is a private company, or IBM was a private company working with the National Socialist government. Well, just because they are private doesn't mean they are respecting the each person owns himself principle. You could be a, Jeffrey Epstein. Well, this might be another story, but generally, Jeffrey Epstein was a private individual. So, does that make what he did morally justified? No, because he didn't respect the each person owns himself principle in the fact that he was raping kids who don't have the mental capacity to consent. So
Right,
you have
and
to
literally
understand the
enslaving
principle. You
girls
can't
and
just say
stuff like
public,
that, right?
private, that sort of thing. Sorry, I'm sorry. Yeah.
No, I mean he was like literally enslaving girls, like enforcing them to have sex with other people. So yeah, like obviously he didn't uphold those principles. You know what I mean? Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
well, that's why it's important to have the principle and not just memorize public good, private bad, business good, business bad. You can be an immoral business person if you are of the consent of one of the parties involved. So that does not it's not about public or private, it's about self-ownership and voluntary exchange and voluntary contracts, and then private property, which is implied in contracts and just transfers. So again, Walter Williams realizing the value of principles as opposed to I mean, if the paper had started out, what year was this written? I'm not seeing a date on this. If the paper had started out, the thing about Bill Clinton is, or Ross Perot is, well, that's going to be irrelevant real quick. The fact that he was able to get to the principles is just so is so vital. He then says, with the recognition of each person owns himself, we readily discover what constitutes just and unjust conduct, claiming that there is a that morality is objective and there is a justified way to uh, uh, find this. In the same way we have a scientific method, we could have a morality method or a philosophical method of if we say that this falls at 1 meter per second, and then we do a test realizing that's not the case, well, we need to ditch that. In the same way, if you have a moral theory that says I believe in equality and also Congress has the right to rule 330 million peaceful people, well, you can't claim that that's a just theory. So in this first paragraph, Walter Williams has contributed more intellect to the human race than, I don't know, every professor that I had in college before I was kicked out, all the teachers, every single late night show on NBC, CNN, MSNBC, just incredible. Any thoughts on that? Oh, yes, he goes on. We readily discover what constitutes just and unjust conduct, referring to murder, rape, and theft. In other words, what differentiates rape from sex is consent, theft from trade is consent, which does adhere to the each person owns himself principle. Brilliant stuff in such a short amount of time.
Right. No, absolutely. And this is something I actually had brought up earlier when you were talking about the poker analogy, where like this is like those fundamental first principles that you don't get from other you point out your professors and stuff, but even uh, for the most part, any like politician who's advocating any. Even the Republicans, I mean, there are some exceptions. There's Thomas Massey, right? But for the most part, nobody has any kind of like a first principle. I mean, AOC may say she has principles, like she supports this program, she supports that program, she supports that program, but like you can't extend that out, right? Like she'll vote for a war or vote for defense spending, so it's not like she really thinks everybody is entitled to health care, because we'll go blow up somebody's hospital and she don't care about that. But she's like, oh, we have to have universal health care in the US. So that's what I think really differentiates Walter Williams from a lot of the other, and this is the importance of the first principles and everything, and like you said, the first paragraph.
Absolutely. He talks about there must be an institutional framework. So if we go to, I don't want to use this example. Let me see if I could think of another one. Well, if we use the example of marijuana legalization, we could say that there was an institutionalized recognition of it being okay to use marijuana long before there was ever any, states legalize A, B, and C. Because if no one at the party is going to call the police, well, then you're going to be able to do it. And there's going to be an institutionalized recognition of it being a morally just action. Whereas, something like, I hate to use this example also. I got to start coming up with new analogies. I'm sorry. But the analogy of, a child rapist, If you're in prison and you're a child rapist, you're probably going to get killed if word gets out. So there again is an institutionalized recognition. It's not about the government writing laws and then telling cops to enforce it. So again,
Right.
institutionalized framework. Yeah, he changes it up there. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, just I think the weed topic is a good one because, like, when I was in college, like it was like the 2010s, and even in states where weed wasn't legal, it was pretty common for, like, different artists and stuff, and from like Willie Nelson to like a rapper or something to go up on stage and like light up a joint and stuff like that. And I mean, for the most part, they got away with it. Like, occasionally people got busted and went to jail, but never for like, lighting up a joint or a blunt on stage. My roommate, my freshman year, went to a Kid Cudi concert, and Kid Cudi did that. Like, he had a video, and he was like, "Oh, it's so cool!" And so yeah, like you say, it kind of doesn't matter what the state says. And one thing that I always focus on when I think of politics, and when people reacted to Trump getting elected, I was like, I don't know how bad things are going to be, because as Andrew Breitbart pointed out, politics are downstream of culture. And so, if you have the culture moving against the president as hard as it was, that's really going to hurt what he's able to do politically. So,
Of course, and one of the biggest, one of the worst things that a politician could do is pass a law that doesn't get enforced or that people just blatantly disrespect, because that's a real hit to their legitimacy. People see, "Oh, I guess we don't just because they write it down doesn't mean we have to follow it." I guess what else can we do that with? That's why Biden went from, "We're going to have a mask mandate my first 100 days," to now he's just asking people to do it. It's like, why not just mandate it? Because if a lot of people are going to resist, and that looks really bad to the halo of legitimacy Williams actually has a really good term for the legitimacy of the state, but we'll get onto that. He cites the importance of the Declaration of Independence, which you have to appreciate for the time of 1776. It's more intelligent than 99% of people on TV today. Just imagine 200 something years ago. This is a brilliant document that people seldom appreciate. So the fact that Williams was willing to cite the Declaration of Independence when the founders are just seen as, dumb racist slave owners at this time, very unappreciative. So that is another thing. He mentions the frequent reference to the fundamental principles is absolutely necessary to preserve the blessings of liberty. This is him quoting the Constitution of the state of North Carolina. So his case is that unless we're able to constantly refer to the principles, we're going to lose. If we're always arguing on the terms of, you know, there was the latest story about this or that person, and now we're going to have a whole philosophy and society based on one single anecdote. Okay, well, I have another competing anecdote. Then we're just throwing stories back and forth at each other. He really gets at the heart of what we need to preserve the blessings of liberty is an unapologetic appeal to principle. Now, if we look at how Bernie Sanders and AOC have made so much progress with the average person just openly calling themselves a socialist or democratic socialist, we can see that these sort of talking points do sometimes resonate with the large scale number of people. So when they make the moral claim, you have a right to health care. Well, we're making the claim, at least I am, that freedom requires you having a right to not be aggressed against. Now, I don't think it's too far off for us to get that message out and get it widely recognized. It's going to be a lot harder because, we don't have the state and professors and the media and the cathedral on our side promoting the ideas. But look at how that just resonates with so many people, and they buy it hook, line, and sinker. So I think Walter Williams again was ahead of his time, even though this was in what the 90s or something. This was written. Did you see when this was written?
No, I didn't know. So I did want to add, people like AOC, and I'm not sure if Bernie signed on to this, but I know some of the more left wing progressives have, talking about not only like having a right to health care, which is one thing to say that we're going to give everybody enough money for insurance or something like that, but talking about single payer and actually getting rid of private health care and making all healthcare a part of the government. And this is apparently something that's pushed by Biden's pick for Secretary of Health and Human Services. He's the current California Attorney General, and he's all for like single payer. And so, when they're talking about having a right to health care, well, they mean you have a right to the health care that we say that you could have, not you have the right to the health care that you choose to have.
Exactly. It's like, don't you love that today we have free, universal, guaranteed security? Because government offers us free police, right? Well, the existence of them claiming to offer you something does not render it immune to scarcity. In other words, there's still the conflict of interest. You're not always going to get all the healthcare you want. It's just going to be decided by a different group who doesn't even get your funds voluntarily. So they have no incentive to create a good product or service. Well, yeah, but we, the people, vote on this. You have no influence on what goes on in the mass murder campaigns referred to as foreign policy. That's about as much as you're going to influence healthcare once the state monopolizes it. Just you know what? Don't just focus on fixing Medicaid because that's the whole thing. There's two types of people according to them in the 1960s: people who can't afford it, who we don't need to worry about, and then people who can afford it. And that's where Medicaid comes in. So just work to reform that. And then once you realize that they don't care and they won't listen to you about reforming Medicaid, well, then you'll realize we are also right about them monopolizing the entire healthcare system. Now, saying that you have a right to something that requires labor on behalf of other people means you have a right to someone else's labor that is also slavery. It's you saying, in other words, if you have a right to this phone, the only way this thing comes about is by individuals trading, investing, saving, postponing consumption, thinking, innovating, and I don't know if I said investing. So, in other words, it requires the labor of human beings. If I am entitled to this and it only comes about as a causal result of other people's labor, that's me saying I'm entitled to the labor of others. That means the only free people that have really ever existed are slave owners. Because unless I have a right to someone else's labor, well, then my rights are being violated. Also, just take what Williams mentioned earlier, the each person owns himself principle. If you and I are hanging out and we have a right to health care, that means you have an obligation to give me health care. But then you also have a right. So I have an obligation to give you health care, even though none of us are experts in the field or know anything else. So the way they will often weasel out of this is, well, all we mean is that government should pick up the tab. This is literally as dumb as saying, I support um, food for all. Therefore, the Koch brothers have the right to steal trillions of dollars so long as they help people get food. And I'm going to call that a positive right to food. You know, giving a group a monopoly over a scarce resource, healthcare, food, security, internet, does not increase access to the average person. You think like all we had to do in the year 1400 was pass a law guaranteeing healthcare. Well, that doesn't mean there's innovation. That doesn't mean there's an increase in products or services. So, yeah, AOC is just ridiculous, and uh, she's so likable to the average person from what I see. Along with Obama now getting loved again with his new book, that it's difficult to fight these people. But certainly with the videos of Walter Williams just being so cool and so funny, I think people like him are good competitors. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I guess one of the things I want to hit on there was when you talk about, having a right to healthcare or something like this, something that people don't immediately think about is, you're then demanding and basically conscripting the labor of the doctors to give you that healthcare. Um, Dub Bondow, who's a really good writer at antiwar.com and from the Cato Institute, was saying in a recent article that when he was in Cuba last, one of his or some anesthesiologist that he met was moonlighting as like a waiter or a busboy or something because you can't make enough money being a doctor to survive, so you gotta like do these like kind of black market ish like side gig kind of things, right? So I thought that was like pretty interesting. And then also something that if you look at the Venezuelan system, so let's say you get what AOC wants, which is universal healthcare and then free college, right? Um, if you do that, then you're going to like basically give the state the control over the lives of doctors. And we've seen this in Venezuela where or Cuba, where they've sent their doctors like to Venezuela, and I don't think the doctors have a whole lot of choice of that. And so, I could see if you move towards this system, let's say you have a situation like the coup going on in Ukraine under the Obama administration, right? Maybe you're a doctor, you get sent to Ukraine, and you gotta like treat some of their like neo-Nazi militia guys over there were backing in the coup or something crazy like that. I mean, it sounds far-fetched, but this is what you're, I think, talking about when you're moving towards this level of socialism and state control over, if you have the right to healthcare, right? And there's a whole bunch of people who live in like like a part of the city that no doctors live in, well, then the state's gonna like make doctors go work in that hospital if that's the only way to provide the healthcare. Now, in a free market situation, maybe there will be kind of fundraising opportunities or like philanthropy to try to like incentivize doctors to live and work in that area or something like that. They certainly, like Doctors Without Borders, will send doctors all over the world who are willing to do it and go into those places, but state conscription is a different thing, and I think that's the direction we'll move with socializing healthcare and all that stuff. College too.
Yeah, the best book that I would recommend on the reason that healthcare is so expensive is a book by Dr. Mary J. Ruwart called Death by Regulation. She makes the case that there's nothing really unique about healthcare. So, in other words, the reason, printers have gone from like this thing that only a few people have to most everyone has access to a printer, like either you have one or a guy who has one. The reason they're much more affordable and readily accessible to the average person is because there is more of a free market in those areas. This allows for more innovation, more competition, more risk, more investment, more of an incentive to meet widespread consumer demand. So it's not just a printer thing, it applies with computers and fans and refrigerators and routers and phones
I
and
think the best
books.
example is the television, especially for some
Oh,
people
yeah.
like our age, right? Like I have two TVs in my apartment right now that I got for free. People just gave to me. That 15 years ago when I was a kid, I couldn't imagine having something that nice. Like, and 10 years later, they were like worthless. And so that's like the kind of quick advancement you get when you have a free market.
Certainly. And, DVD players have gone from this amazing thing that you could save up to afford, and now there's 50 DVD players at every Goodwill that they have to wipe the dust off of because people now even have better options. So we have stifled so much innovation because of the Food and Drug Administration regulations that have started to heavily exceed since the year 1962 is what Ruart goes into. But yeah, that is the book that will really give you concrete examples as to why a third party, the state, violently intervening in what would otherwise be voluntary arrangements between parties is what lowers our access to goods, products, and services, and raises the price and makes them so difficult. Walter Williams talks about
But
A lot of
can we
things,
hit on one more thing in there real
of
quick, just
course.
because I think it's so important, which is like the right to try laws that have been passed in recent years, which I think if we go down the road to really socializing healthcare, you won't have anymore. Where for a long time it was only the drugs the FDA said that you could use and had approved you could actually take, and then they started passing laws that said, well, if you're gonna die, you could take whatever you want. And there are some more restrictions on it, but they have opened it up quite a bit. But if we move even more towards socialized healthcare, and eventually it'll socialize the drug companies and everything like that as well. I mean, they certainly talk about that, and drug pricing is a huge thing when you talk about Medicare and all that, and those certainly massive subsidies, I'm sure, really control what happens in the drug market anyways. But you're gonna have even less choice because of the government. If the FDA doesn't think it's a good idea, well, it's just not gonna get funding. It's not even gonna exist, at least with some kind of free market. And even with the restrictions we have, at least if you're dying, you have a right to try something. But I think those drug options just won't exist. And so again, they talk about free healthcare. Well, but you don't have any freedom within that healthcare either.
Exactly, exactly. Williams talks about there being a number of things that people can do outside of, lobbying to Congress for laws, ideas that people can embrace to have an institutional framework of freedom in society. He says values such as thrift, hard work, honesty, trust, and cooperative behavior based on shared norms are the keys to improving the human condition and provide the undergirding for a free market economy. Just as important are such social institutions as respect for private property, sanctity of contracts, educational institutions, clubs, charities, churches, and families. So, as opposed to what we often hear is the way we're going to fix this is we're going to pass a law that says A, B, and C. Well, even if you happen to choose the wording of the law, you don't get to choose how it's enforced or how the judges see it or if it's enforced at all. So the fact that he was able to get into the actual ideas of what makes societies free and prosperous, as opposed to the dumb immediate thinking of we must sign HR 963 in order to. That's a joke. No one reads it. No one knows what it is. These are the real things that separate civilization from barbarism.
Right. Yep. And I mean, I feel like the government, especially now, has pretty selective of how they enforce laws and who they enforce them on. Especially with, laws that are meant to like regulate government and government officials.
Exactly. He says the rules considered in what David Hume called the stability of possessions. So if you think that something's going to get torn down within a week, or they're going to lock down your business by legal fiat, you're much less likely to spend time innovating and investing in something when you don't have the stability of possessions. Transference by consent. In other words, construction workers don't want 50 buildings. What they want is to build a building, get money for it, and then spend the money on other things that they like in the division of labor. And the keeping of promises. This is also vital. If you can't trust people, it's extremely difficult to have any sort of, reliable way to achieve your ends in society. But needing people to keep their promises does not justify a state, or certainly an interventionist state, at all.
Yeah,
Um,
actually,
yeah.
I wanted to hit on one in three there because I thought they were really interesting when you to think about U.S. sanctions, especially on countries like Iran and Cuba, who had like a little bit of sanctions relief under the Obama administration. Well, once that happened, like all the entrepreneurs in these countries where opening up new businesses that were appealing to American tourists in Cuba or in Iran, they were looking to like expand factory output to do more business with Germany. And the people who were like really excited and seemed to be really entrepreneurs who want to connect with people from the West, like got on board right away and wanted to be the first person in the door. Well, then Trump gets elected, comes in and sanctions everything. So all those people, I mean, at best the contracts were destroyed, and all of like the time that they had invested in their businesses was completely wasted. If not, people who in Cuba maybe opened up like a new business, appealing to American tourists coming in, and it's in the right port and everything like that. Well, the American stock company that goes out of business, and now this is the guy who, in a longtime communist country, was the most entrepreneurial, and was the one that like was first went out there to try to like exploit the opportunities given to him, and it wrecked his life probably, right? And so what kind of examples does that set for the rest of that society? And even if like Biden comes in and lifts the sanctions on these countries, or starts to remove some of Trump's restrictions on Cuba, like the travel restrictions, are you going to go back out and open up a business if it could change in a couple of years? I don't know. And so these things are hugely important, and thinking about it just here, but also how it impacts with foreign policy and sanctions and stuff.
Exactly. He actually uses some real world examples using more free market examples. He uses the US, Canada, Australia, Hong Kong, Japan, and Taiwan. Now, Japan's an interesting example because Japan, and was it Taiwan? I think it was South Korea. So it was Japan was like the home of sweatshops, in the 50s or something. This all according to the work of professor at Southern California, Matt Zwolinski. I forget where he works, but talks about the history of sweatshops starting in Japan, and then they the companies, what they did in their own interest, by the way, not because they're humanitarians. uh they educated the people there so they could have more productive workers and a more productive factory so they could sell to more people so they could make more money. So again, we see this harmonious attempt to have the individual interest and societal interest are not in conflict, but they are harmonious. Something else that Walter Williams brought up, he said, "Why is it that people in Idaho are up in the middle of the night making sure there's potatoes for people to have in New York because they love New Yorkers so much?" No, it's because it's sort of in their incentive to do so. Or people in Montana work so they could ship stuff to New York? Why are they so nice? How does this happen? And it's, well, because of free markets, voluntary exchange, and freedom of association. So in the case of Japan, it started off poor and then slowly got wealthy. So then the sweatshops moved to South Korea, which were very poor. And thank God you didn't just have some labor regulation that outlawed being able to work there, or a bunch of idiots boycotting it. So they go from small wages to no wages, and now they never get any experience, and the place never becomes a civilization that, well, I mean, Hong Kong is a place that we almost envy now. Um, so we constantly see free markets going to a place and it just being like a wealth bomb, where you go from virtually nothing subsistence levels to general levels of civilization, at least a framework where people can have opportunities to have families, achieve their dreams, get access to the outside world with computers, access to servers, internet connections, cables and Ethernet cords alone, shipping those to places, gives people access to ideas, thoughts, and poems and literature that they never would have had access to otherwise. He says these are examples, are far richer and have greater human rights protections than people in countries with limited free markets, such as Russia, Albania, China, and every other country in Africa. Of course, I think Russia moved a little more free market since he went there, but they're going back because Putin's been bashing individualism. Um, it's amazing.
Yeah.
You advocate freedom, and that's greedy. You advocate the state violently dominating other people, and that's like that's like the cool hip thing to do.
Well, just something to point out, and this isn't like me trying to justify Putin's policy because he has, moved to, I think, nationalize more. But one of the things that he has used as an excuse to do that is to point at American sanctions and say that look what happens because sometimes sanctions went on Russia, and like they, I think at one point targeted the cheese industry or something like that, and so it hurt, you know, Russians who were exporting cheese or whatever else they were exporting to Europe. Yeah, and now they're trying to sanction like Russia's the pipeline that's going to bring natural gas from Russia into Germany, and anyways, Putin will make the point that, well, it's because of these sanctions that we have to have more nationalism and a more planned economy, because we had to be able to, do more substance here at home, and if we're exporting too much or whatever, then that's going to put us at risk. I believe the same thing to some extent has happened in Iran too, where the government has taken over like more of the pharmaceutical industry, because sanctions have wrecked the supply chain there. So that's not necessarily saying that the countries are right to do that. It's going to hurt them more, but it's the U.S. imperialism that's, at least to some extent, giving the cover for the leaders to do it.
Correct. Both foreign and domestic regulation is immoral, unjustified, and totally uneconomic. Walter, then, it's amazing that we're in like the third page of this, and he's already getting so much. Uh, he gets into the idea of, why some countries are wealthy and some are poor, in reference to, the Canada, Hong Kong, Australia. He actually mentions Australia and New Zealand again. So many people will say things like natural resource endowment is a reason a country is wealthy because of the natural resources. Not the case. In fact, you have places like, what does he cite? He cites the Soviet Union, Africa, and South America. So two continents and a huge country. Have a lot of resources. That doesn't make you wealthy. If you don't have the ideas of how to find the resources and create them into things that people value and improve their lives, well, then you're just sitting on a ton of, resources that are not really yielding anything positive for the populace. He then refutes the nonsense that colonialism is what makes a country wealthy. You've had wealth, resource wealth, and colonialism since like the days of, I don't know, ancient Samaria and Genghis Khan. Uh, that doesn't make you wealthy. And then the funniest one is where they say slavery makes you wealthy. In America alone, we became much wealthier after the abolition of chattel slavery. And slavery had existed since, according to the research I've done, it's like 3100 BC is was when there were slaves in Mesopotamia, and it was written in the legal code. So he refutes natural resource endowment, colonialism. He says the world's richest countries, the United States, a former colony, Canada, colony, Australia was a colony, New Zealand was a colony, Hong Kong remains a colony. So that does not explain. He says the sources of wealth are the values and traditions that produce the rules of several property. So, in other words, the institutionalized recognition of property rights allows people to recognize they own themselves, and they can make exchanges with other people who they also see as people who own themselves. I don't own anyone else, so I have to create something of value in order to improve my current condition. This is where we get wealth from.
Right. Well, I mean, a couple things that I think to point out there. I'm assuming he's not saying that a country couldn't have been impoverished by being colonized. I'm sure like there are examples where like they did go in and just raid everything and leave, and or kill a certain group of people, go in and put a certain group of people in charge that were minority groups. Like all these things happen that like somewhat impoverished, just because I know I have listeners who will make the point, they'll think of like one example and be like, oh no, this time it wasn't. So I don't think that's the point. I'm just saying that I think he's saying that that's not the ultimate factor, is the colonialism or not. And then the other point, at least with the US, and I'm sure it's the case in a lot of these countries, where I mean, it only really increases the wealth of the elite few who get a benefit off of the colonialism. I mean, if you were like a British regular, did getting sent to the Americas to fight us, like, did that enrich your life? You know what I mean? To taking that musket ball in the knee and then, getting your leg chopped off only to have the sepsis set in anyways and slowly die, thousands of miles from your family. Like, did colonialism help you? No. Did it help the king? Yeah. And so, now does it benefit the soldiers, who go to Afghanistan? Not really. Does it benefit the board members of Lockheed Martin and Raytheon and the president and the people at like West End Execs and all these think tanks? Yeah. But it doesn't help me or you or anybody I know.
Again, it's the benefit of the few at the expense of the many. If people really got, in this case, you wouldn't call it a product or service, you would call it psychological utility of, whenever I fund this organization, I feel better as a result of it. Well, that's a voluntary trade where people are making a market interaction and increasing their social utility as they see fit. With examples of the East India Company and everywhere else, you don't have the right to have it. So it is literally some benefiting at the expense of others, and that's why colonialism and things like that are totally unjustified. For the same reason, Russia doesn't have the right to invade us, or you could use the example of Syria. Like, is it okay if someone invades America, sanctions it, and kills Bill Clinton because he used gas against his own people in Waco, Texas? He used CS gas to start a fire and kill everyone inside because they resisted the state. That's better than the mask mandate being refused, actually resisting them. And the general answer is no, because you can automatically see one group of people initiating violence against another. Well, just take that principle and hold it consistently against your own government. So even though the Assad story is definitely fake, I think Mattis was asked what evidence is there, and he says, "Well, at the time, we don't have any evidence." Guys like Aaron Mate have done excellent work on how the Assad gassing his own people story is also fake. But
Well,
yeah,
just just an
again, we're not getting caught up in the story. If you go down to the principle and apply it consistently, you can see there's no justification for any of this.
Yeah, I just wanted to add there's a great new Aramate piece out today at the Gray Zone with more lead documents from the OPCW showing, and Aaron puts together the narrative on how the OPCW actually, like, basically slow walked the report on Duma, the alleged chemical weapons attack there, until the inspector, who was like the main inspector who actually went to Duma and who was saying that this wasn't a chemical weapons attack, they put him on vacation for 6 weeks until he retired. And then they published the report after he was gone. And so this is like the kind of shenanigans that went on along that. And I'll get into more details on the next show, but that came out this morning. It was such a huge story. Maybe we should just hit on like one more point here before we wrap, because we're coming up to an hour. But I know that we're only a few pages into this great document that I will link to in the show notes page. That way people who want to read the whole thing can.
Exactly, yeah, and this is another perfect example of why you have to take the Walter Williams approach to arguing on principle, because it takes so long to find out the truth about a story, and then you finally find out it's a lie, and then the idiot populace has moved on to something else. Hey, remember the Kurds that are getting slaughtered indiscriminately? Yep, no, we haven't heard a word about the Kurds since we heard about them with a fake ABC video. Look, the Kurds are getting murdered. No, it's a shooting gun range video from Kentucky.
That
You
was
just made that up.
fantastic.
Or did you see Bana Alabad give an interview to CNN? That 5-year-old girl who's like, "I blame Bashar al-Assad for Syria war." Did you
Yeah.
see that?
No, I
That, that
think she was
that's
the
so
scripted
sick.
one, right? I think she did like another interview where like it was obvious that she was on a script, because like the first time they asked her like what her favorite food was and she was like, I'm really scared. And then they asked her like the question that should have led to I'm really scared, and she said fish. So I
That is
believe it was
funny.
likely, yeah, I think it was Eva Bartlett. I'll try to send you the link. I'll try to dig that up and find it, because it's a few years ago now. But yeah, they really do try to like exploit little stories like children on this to fuel their regime change efforts. It's crazy.
Sickening, just like the babies in incubators with Iraq, pulling at the heartstrings. I'll make a final point on this.
All right.
Williams says the intellectual defense of free market capitalism should focus on its moral superiority. In other words, even if free enterprise were not more efficient than other forms of human organization, it is morally superior because it is rooted in voluntary relationships rather than force and coercion, and it respects the sanctity of the individual. Finishing with the rise of capitalism and the rise of human productivity, people were able to satisfy their physical needs with less and less time. Economic progress made it possible for people to have the time to develop spiritually and culturally. The rise of capitalism enabled the gradual extension of civilization to greater and greater numbers of people. By the way, we're not even halfway through the paper. You got to
Right.
read this. I definitely recommend. This is, I would say, this is one of the best introductory papers because the average person who doesn't, agree with us, it's like, well, you don't want to give them Man, Economy, and State, 1,405 pages or something like that. They're not going to read it. 10 pages, real short and sweet, focusing on the morality and the economics, philosophy and economics. Whew, what a great paper. Walter Williams, rest in peace, brother.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for coming on and talking to this, yeah, and talking to us about this great hero of liberty, and having a chance to really get into some of these issues and subjects. And maybe we'll have to do another show like in the coming month or so, talking more about like economics and these principles because they are really important. Uh, I know most of the time my audience likes, more hard news stories, but I'm glad that we get incorporate a lot of that into everything we talk about. Keith, tell people where to find your work, where to subscribe to you, support you, all that stuff.
I would ask that people check out my videos. I'm at about 580 videos advocating the principles of self ownership, the non aggression principle, truth in history, and logical fallacies, sort of attempting to help people think clearly about certain things. So you can find me at Keith Knight, Don't Tread on Anyone, on places like Library, BitChute. I also have a YouTube channel, but I've been striked a couple. They've struck me a couple times, so maybe check out my alternative platforms as well. Under each one of my videos, you can see where else to find me. Kyle, thanks so much for you bringing truth to the foreign policy arena, and thank you for having me on.
Yeah, right on. And also, I think you find both our shows at the Libertarian Institute. So, libertarianinstitute.org on the homepage. Right hand column, if you scroll down, it's Scott's show, Pete's show, my show, and Keith's show. So, check it out. And thanks for tuning in.